Today I'm here to talk to you about House Bill 930 and the Atlanta Region Transit Link Authority. And again, Chairman Boyce put it best. This is for informational purposes. I want to walk you through both a bit of the intent behind the bill, at least as it's been relayed to me by some of the authors behind the bill, as well as some of the specific language in the bill and some of the specific options that it creates. And then I'm more than happy, especially with a group this size, to just really field questions, because if you haven't seen the bill itself, it's 77 pages long, and if you're having any trouble sleeping, I highly encourage you to go ahead and read every page. But today, what I'm going to try to do is sort of give you the Reader's Digest version or the highlights of the bill. Okay. So, the bill itself at its highest level is focusing on taking a look at transit from a regional perspective, starting with the acknowledgement that we have over 10 different transit operators operating within what is a 13-county region. And you can even argue there's some more than that. So how do we make sense of everything that's going on? What are some of the options and potential for better connections, as well as potential expansion and funding? And collectively, the name the Atlanta Region Transit Link Authority is the name that is specified in the bill. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. So House Bill 930 passed the legislature on the last day, in the last hour. And on May 3rd, Governor Deal went ahead and signed it into law. And again, like I said, the name is captured in the bill. The purpose, the overarching purpose, is to create a unifying entity, again, to look at the coordinated planning and the services that are offered within the region, taking a broader approach than looking on a county-by-county basis, because quite frankly, a lot of what we're seeing from an economic development perspective really impacts and had ripple effects throughout the entire region. It does have the power, this is a state agency, it has power to oversee the activities of these various transit operators. Again, not to necessarily replace what they do, but to provide a more coordinated and unified approach. The ATL and House Bill 930 can really be summed up in about 5 major components. And you see them there on the screen. A regional governance model. And we're going to spend some time walking through that. That's one of the areas that most people are finding to be the most sort of complex to understand. I'll give you some background on that. A regional transit plan. This is one of the key or core activities of this group. This is not a transit plan that only has projects that are regional in nature. Rather, it is supposed to be a comprehensive plan that lists all transit projects that occur anywhere within the region. So you'll be able to go to one place to identify any activities or any projects that are underway for transit. Transit funding, and we're going to speak about that. I have a feeling there'll be a lot of questions about that, so it's like the best part of the movie, so save it, not towards the end, but at least it's in the middle of this. And unified branding, and we'll talk about that. And then, of course, how does this impact existing operators, be they Cobb Link, be they Express, be they MARTA, et cetera. So let's jump into the governance. The ATL has, under this bill, a 16-member board, 1 non-voting member, and that is the GDOT commissioner. And like I said, I work very closely, like on the Northwest Corridor Express lanes with Russell McMurray. I'm sure many of you have been out to hear him speak. He's doing a lot of terrific things really across the state. So I rarely get to say this, but for now, just put Russell to the side. Just forget about Russell and GDOT just for a second. And I say that for 2 reasons. One, he is a non-voting member. He's a critical component because everything that we're doing in transportation is really connected. But the other reason is when you put that aside, you're left with 15 members. 1/3 are appointed at the state level. 2/3 are appointed through a local process at the local level. You can see it up there on the board. So the governor has 1 appointee, and whoever the governor appoints serves as the chair of the ATL authority. The Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker of the House each have 2 appointees, okay? And they can come from anywhere within the state. The other 2/3, the other 10 members, are appointed through a local process, and we're going to talk about that. But it is a combination of voting that's done by the legislative caucus that are comprised in each of these districts. And we're going to talk about this map in these districts, as well as a vote from a mayor who is a representative for all the mayors within the district. So let's pause there for a second, because one of the questions is going to be, well, I'll take it back one. Common question is, we already have 13 counties. Why subdivide it yet again into some other parcels, these 10 districts? This is one of the areas where I said we're talking about the intent behind the bill. The intent behind the bill was to come up with a way that each of these board members are thinking from a regional perspective, because we know that a lot of our transit and our transportation and our commuting patterns don't quite stop neatly at county jurisdictional lines. These 10 districts, and you can see they're sort of different sizes and shapes. How this was created by the Reapportionment Office of the General Assembly, the same group that focuses on creating redistricting maps after like the census and those type of activities. Each of these districts comprise approximately 450,000 citizens. And that is why when you get, like if you look in the south, the one at the bottom is District 10. Because you don't have the same density, the district has to be bigger to hit that population number. But the Reapportionment Office looked at both population as well as some of the transportation patterns. Which way are commuters traveling? So can't explain all the science behind it, but the biggest takeaway is each of these have roughly the same amount of citizens in each region. And yes, as you can see from the map, most of these cut across one, if not more, county lines. So when someone's appointed to the board, they aren't just representing their home county, but they have to think across these lines. They have to try to think regional in nature. And that's one of the reasons for this structure. Now, if we talk about this process, I mentioned earlier that the entire legislative, the General Assembly has a say. And so what will happen is if any state representative or state senator's legislative district falls in whole or in part in one of these 10 districts, they have a vote for that board seat. Seems complex, but actually this is very similar to the process that is already in place for the selection of GDOT board members. And in fact, I could see over time in the future, the timing for these votes lining up with when those votes already occur in the General Assembly. The mayor's piece. The mayors, all the mayors that fall within, again, where their municipalities fall in whole or in part within one of these districts, they will have to get together and they pick a single mayoral representative who too gets to have a vote on those seats. There are some similarities to how mayoral representatives are picked for the regional commission today, but you'll also know if you look into that different counties do it differently on that. And so that's one of the pieces that honestly will take probably a fair amount of time to go ahead and coordinate. And so, and by the way, the legislation says that the board should be seated by December 1 of this year. So one of the things from a staff perspective that we'll be doing is reaching out to the various selectors, if you will, to try to walk them through this, to give some suggestions procedurally on how this can be accomplished, to provide information on how this process already takes place when we look at, say, the DOT board member election process, and to help just provide staff support for this process. Who can serve? So the other thing I should point out, The standard term for these ATL board members is going to be 4 years. Those that come from an odd number district for this very first vote will serve for 2 years. And that's just designed so that you end up with a staggered vote, so you're not turning over the members of the board all at once. But in general, after that initial period, they'll serve for 4 years. Who can serve? In order to be eligible to be a member of the board, the short answer is any citizen could serve in any of these 10 slots. You have to be a resident of that district, so where your principal residence, where you vote, needs to be within that district. The legislation says they need to possess significant experience that's relevant to the authority. That does not mean they're looking for transportation professionals. Rather, this is more focused on what are some of the areas? Maybe it's business, maybe it's from accounting, maybe it's from marketing communications, but what are some of the skill sets that you would want to see, quite frankly, almost on any type of corporate board? And, but one thing is also clear in the legislation. If someone serves on the ATL board, they're ineligible for serving on any other state board or state position. The only exception is the ex officio GDOT commissioner who doesn't have a vote. So again, if you serve on the ATL board, you couldn't also serve, say, on the Greta board or Board of Regents or any of these other state entities. Okay. Yes. And the question, if you can hear it, was how do you ensure a diversity of expertise on the board? That's something that isn't scripted in the bill. I think that once you are looking at membership being selected on a per district basis, that's something that each jurisdiction under the transit district should keep in mind. I think going forward, after initial board is established and you see what type of expertise that you have, then just like, again, almost any other board, that may lead people to saying, oh, wouldn't it be great or nice if we had somebody with this type of background or that type? But there's certainly nothing in the legislation that scripts that.
I'm a little confused. Is it one board or 10 boards?
It is one board. And the question is it one board or 10 boards? It is.
So you're saying, I'm sorry, that there are only 10 members from the 10 districts?
Correct. One per district.
Ah, okay. I was confused on that.
Yeah, so 16-member board. There's 10 districts. Would be one board member from each district, plus the 5 members that are appointed at the state level, and the non-voting GDOT commissioner for your total of 16 board members. Okay.
You also said that there's areas have to get together and form a mayor that people like. We'll have subgroups within it also, correct?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
You said that the mayors have to get together from their regions and appoint a mayor to vote on that particular on the board, correct?
Correct.
So that means you're going to have subgroups up under those 10 groups, correct?
Yes, the mayors.
I think that was just a question more of like.
Yeah, all the mayors that fall into a particular district need to get together and pick a representative. That is one of the steps that will have to take place first before you can follow through with actually picking the individual board member. Okay. The commission chair? The commission chair, whoever the governor selects on the board, automatically serves as the commissioner per the law. Okay. And again, I'm sure there'll be more questions on this part of the process as well as the funding piece. I'm going to hit some of the highlights and then we can come back to those questions. Regional transit plan. This is one of the key components of this bill. The House Bill 930 requires that there be a regional transit plan, again, that's encompassing of all transit projects that are happening within the 13-county region. And I should have said up front, the 13-county region is the exact same 13 counties as the 13 counties that fell under Greta's jurisdiction. So there's no change as far as those counties. But this regional transit plan, the bill requires that it have at least a 6-year and 20-year horizon. For those who aren't spending a lot of time around transportation, that may just seem sort of arbitrary, but it's not. That coincides with federally required transportation plans that the Regional Commission has to produce and provide to the feds. The 6-year horizon aligns with what we call the TIP, or the Transportation Improvement Plan. Forget all the acronyms. You know, this is government. We love our acronyms. What's important to know here is in the 6-year plan, that's where you're likely to see projects that are fiscally constrained, meaning it's a project that's supposed to happen in this window and all the funding has been identified. The 20-year horizon is projects that are planned long-term, whether or not all the funding has been identified and secured. So this is one of the reasons I think this is something that will be very helpful for people, because you may hear about projects, and people may talk a lot about projects like they're a done deal, they're going forward. At least for transit, the intent here is, if it's a project that's definitely happening in 6 years, you should see it in that 6-year plan. If it's in that time frame, and if all the funding's been identified. If you don't have both those, then even if it's in the short term, it should be in the 20-year, non-fiscally constrained program. So I think this will be one of the tools that will help people tell reality from, I shouldn't say fiction, but at least things that are, all the pieces aren't in place, okay? This is not done in a vacuum. This entity has to work in consultation with what's called the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is the Atlanta Regional Commission. Because again, this plan is focused just on transit, but there's any number of transportation projects. And so they'll have to work hand in hand, because projects should end up on both lists.
Hey, Chris, question, thank you. What if there were a county, let's say hypothetically Cherokee County, let's say their county had a priority to do X, Y, and Z with transit, but that was not part of the regional plan. Is there any statutory prohibition for them doing something as a county that's not consistent with that plan, or does this somehow preempt any transit activity by a county because it's not in that plan?
So the answer to that question is, after January 1, all transit projects in the region are supposed to be listed on that plan if they're moving forward. But to your point, and just as a matter of practical, from a practical standpoint, those projects, let's say Cherokee County has something and it was moving forward already, it probably is already in that TIP plan, if it's actually funded. And where this group will start, and again, this is my opinion, but it's the only thing that would make logical sense, quite frankly, is you will start by adopting everything that's already in motion in the TIP. This is not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah.
And I asked the question, let's if we take this away from the capital, so the things that are capital intensive, let's say a paratransit or a ride share service, a user subsidy or something like that. Let's say that the ATL region had and I'm not talking about that's in place now. Let's just say something that were to start in 2020, a concept. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's say the ATL region had a priority to do a series of things in Cherokee County, and the Cherokee County Commission that came on board in 2020 said, we don't want to do that. I know it's in the 6-year plan. We want to start a completely new and novel demand-side subsidy for rideshare or something like that. It's not part of the plan. Mm-hmm. Does this create statutory preemption that would prevent Cherokee County from doing that because it's not in the plan?
It runs that possibility if that plan or that project can only move forward with federal funding or funding from the state. We're on the next slide, I'm going to talk about the funds. This entity has authority over federal funds and state funds. There's nowhere that you're going to see that it has authority over local funds. So if that project is being paid for out of a county's general fund, or which a lot of times is coming from property taxes, it's not coming from, again, a state source or federal source, then the project needs to be listed in the plan, but that money is unaffected.
So SPLOST dollars do not operate pursuant to any state authority. Those are purely local dollars from the state.
Those are local dollars. And that's going to be true even for the transit SPLOST funds that are possible under this bill. Okay. Thanks. So, yeah,
Sorry about that.
no problem.
But let's say that in the SPOS funds, you have a matching dollar
Right.
for a state or federal, then it has to be part of the plan.
Well, so two things. It has to be part of the plan regardless. It's just that if it's all local dollars, again, this is supposed to be a comprehensive place where you can find all projects that are happening within the region. But if there's a matching piece, yes, this entity has some say. And I'm going to break it down because on the federal side, there are what we call formula funds, which counties and certain operators are getting regardless. All right, those are formula based. That's based on the transit services that exist, the populations that's served, how many miles. This has a role, but that's formula based. This doesn't change those federal formulas. Then you have what we call discretionary. There's money available at the federal level, which we all know didn't come from the federal level, it probably came from the state level, but you have to compete to get them. This entity can have a say on helping prioritize where we go as a region after those funds. And the reason for that, and in fact, a grant just came out from the federal government, and it says anyone can apply from within a region, but it literally says if in that region on the same corridor we see multiple proposals from two different entities, the federal government, again, has nothing to do with this bill, let me be crystal clear. The federal government is saying we will disqualify both of them because we show there isn't partnership happening there, and we're not going to play King Solomon and pick. And so that's one of the reasons that something like this can help, because if there isn't coordination, then everyone could be a loser. So. And I already mentioned this regional transit plan. It doesn't give a specific date that this has to be in place, but it does say that after January, transit plans that are happening in the region must be part of the plan. So one of the things that from a staff perspective, from an interim executive director perspective, I'm focused on is how do we not create any issues while we're standing this up for things that are already moving? And in large part, that I take as how are we going to incorporate the projects and plans that are already moving forward and are already part of what we call this federal tip. We are not starting from scratch here. All right, the transit fund piece. This is the one I get the most questions about, so let's see how this goes. Now, a couple things before we talk about the T-SPLOS. This bill goes beyond just the T-SPLOS, and that's on the next slide. It allows the ATL to serve in what's called the designated recipient role. My goal here today is not to make everybody transit experts, but it's something that you want to be aware of. You remember I was just talking about those formula funds. Right now, in our region, actually even beyond our region, MARTA serves as what's called a designated recipient. All that is it's an entity that the federal government can look at, and all federal funds that are coming into this region today, so again, let me be clear, this is already happening today. Just most people who aren't in transit aren't aware. On paper, in theory, it passes through MARTA's hands. I'm talking about the formula funds that everyone's entitled to, and it gets what we call suballocated, passed out. MARTA actually does that for a 23-county area. Under this bill, the ATL will start doing that role. It is a pass-through. It doesn't affect what, say, a Cobb County or anyone gets. But the reason it's important, the reason I mention it, the reason you should care about it is at the state level now, there's a visibility and transparency to where all these dollars are flowing. Again, it doesn't change, it's formula-based, but it allows us to see where all these dollars are going and pass them on. And instead of MARTA doing it, you will have a state entity doing that, okay? I already mentioned the second bullet. All federal and state transit funds in the region fall under the purview of the ATL. Again, just like I promised, it doesn't say anything about local dollars. There are constitutional reasons for that, nor was it the intent, though, of the authors of this bill to impact that. In fact, if you go back to that board, you remember I was saying it's basically 2/3 local? This bill's an acknowledgement of the fact, and you don't always see this at the state level. You have a new state level entity that's created where 2/3 of the board is selected at the local level. And if you talked with either Chairman Tanner or Senator Beach, they would tell you they recognize that most of the money that's being spent on transit today is coming from local sources. It's part of the reason why the governor has a single pick. It's part of the reason why, even though it's a state level entity, only 1/3 of the members of the board are picked at the state level, 2/3 at the local level. But again, it's not a mistake that local dollars is not mentioned there. The governor's put up $100 million, or recommended in the budget $100 million in general obligation bonds in the last week of the session. And what he had said is he is recommending including this in the budget if a good transit bill ended up on his desk. Obviously, this bill ended up on his desk. He signed it, and that money is available. We can see exactly where that's going. And the ATL itself has the power to issue bonds. Yeah. Did I hear a question? Yes.
Are you interpreting the agency status of Florida is now going to migrate to the ATL with respect to the compliance side of the equation to Federal Transit Authority with all of those pass-through funds? Because we had that conversation during the pendency of the bill, but are you guys, through the staff work you're doing, ATL is going to pick up the compliance responsibility for all of those pass-throughs that now are agency funds?
Yeah, so the simple answer is yes, but it does not remove individual agencies' responsibility for also doing compliance. But yes, when it comes to this designated recipient role and understanding where these federal formula funds are going, and is everyone following all the federal procedures, that will be an oversight role of the ATL, not MARTA. And that is something that, again, MARTA didn't do it in a vacuum. There are different committees that are made up of representatives from Cobb Link and all the operators. But they were the ones that had the relationship with the federal government. That has switched to the state. Okay. The transit-specific SPLOST. I'll put these bullets up. So a couple of things. What this bill does is it creates a new funding option that did not exist prior to the signing of this bill. It is an option. It's optional. Every entity, every county that is in this 13 counties, even with this bill signed, the status quo has not changed for the counties. This bill has not increased what a county has to spend. It has not decreased what a county is doing today. The only additional mandatory burden that is directly created by this bill is participating in the selection of the board member. Okay? Nothing is changed from the status quo about the transit and services as they're being delivered today. What this does is provides a new option for a new type of SPLOST. And by the way, it didn't impact the powers and ability to do a traditional T-SPLOST or transportation SPLOST. If you're not familiar with those generally have a maximum term of 5 years. What's different about this one, essentially this bill says, if a county, and Cobb County there's an asterisk, because Cobb has an additional option, and I'll get to that in a second. But the general language says, if a county wants to produce a list of projects that are transit specific, then that county can put forth in front of the voters a new sales tax for up to 1% for up to 30 years. It doesn't have to be 1%. It can be in increments of 0.05%, so it doesn't have to be a full penny. It also doesn't have to be 30 years. And one of the questions I've gotten is, and it wasn't here, this is my first time speaking here, But in other counties, from some elected officials, like, why would I ever try to put in front of my citizens a 30-year sales tax? And the reason, one of the key differences about this option is most SPLOST are used for capital funds, the building and construction. This one can be used for that, as well as the associated ongoing operation and maintenance costs. That's why it allowed for this option of up to 30 years. We talked a little bit about some of the federal funding that's available. There's federal funding, again, this is what we call discretionary funding, where you can apply for it. Some of this funding will fund projects even up to like half the cost of the project. In general, for those federal programs, though, what the federal government wants to see is a committed revenue source for at least 20 years so that they help build something. They know that the money is been dedicated for the operation of it. So that was one of the drivers behind this time frame, and one of the things that this allows that a normal or the existing transportation SPLOST doesn't allow. Okay? The projects have to be listed in this regional transit plan and approved by the ATL. That's a step even before it goes, it's proper to go on the referendum. But that is just a step. It's like we need to know about it at the regional level. It needs to be there. But then it has to go in front of the voters for a vote, just like any other SPLOST. And the funds generated by this are local funds. This is money that would be, first of all, passed in a county, generated, collected, and must be spent within that county. Okay? I'm going to mention this real quick. Counties outside of the 13 counties, this is one of the few areas of House Bill 930 that isn't ATL specific, but counties outside of the 13 counties can partner up. If you have 2 or more counties, they too can use these, this T-SPLOST mechanism. Yes.
It's also like a SPLOST in that when the voters go to vote on this, there'll be a specific notebook of projects, and they'll know exactly what they're voting for.
Yeah, and I don't know if everyone heard the question. Does it work like a normal SPLOST where the projects themselves have to be listed so the voters know what the money's being spent on? And the answer is yes. It is patterned after the existing SPLOST legislation. The difference is this can be up to 1%. That can supersede caps if you're coming up against a cap, and of course the time frame. But the projects have to be identified, et cetera. And remember what I was saying about the transit plan. One of the things that I believe is the intent of the ATL is that these projects, at least from this regional entity, someone has looked at the financial feasibility of the plan. It's not a substitute at all for the voters, but it's understanding, do we understand where the money is going to come from on this? And I want to take questions, but I want to talk about the Cobb specific piece, and then we can sort of pause there and see what questions we have. Gwinnett County, Cobb County, and Fulton County have some slightly different provisions. The reason they have the ability to have something a little bit different than everybody else is because those counties, obviously along with Clayton and DeKalb, fall within the original potential jurisdiction of MARTA. So there's already what we call a special local legislation, that's the MARTA Act, which allowed them to do a couple of things different. And so some of these provisions fall under there. But let's just jump straight to Cobb. Cobb County has the ability to create a special district. Doesn't have to create it, it has the ability to create a special district where it doesn't have to be inclusive of the entire county. And it requires a committee that's comprised of both the Cobb County Commission and the Cobb State Legislative Caucus to each agree on the boundaries of a map. And if you can have by majority vote an agreement on that map, then you could move forward with a special district where that 1% tax could be put into place and only apply within the boundaries of that group. And that is only for projects that are specific or going to be subject of like contracting with MARTA. Again, just like this did not change what can already be done under normal T-SPLOS, this has not changed the county's ability to do the general 1%. It didn't affect Cobb's ability to vote to join MARTA if that's what Cobb wanted to do. These created additional options. The other thing I'd point out about the special district, this option is on a timer. Cobb County has this ability to create a special district anytime between now and December of 2019. After that, these provisions are repealed. So this is a very short-term, very specialized carve-out, but it's an option. Cobb does not have to do that. One of the questions I've gotten is, well, since this is something different and it's a special district, do the same rules apply? Meaning, does that money, if it's generated in that special district, must it be spent within that special district? Is it locked down to that district? And my answer is yes. The reason for this is really tied back to constitutional and who votes on this tax and where the money is collected. But this also has what I would call belt and suspenders. You have general law that covers that, and then all these projects, because if you do the special district, these are for projects that are working in conjunction with MARTA, will be subject to a contract with MARTA, where that too, again, for belt and suspenders, you can make it crystal clear exactly how that money is being applied, et cetera. The ATL will be involved with helping make sure that monies are not spent across the wrong lines. And at the state level, the state has experience doing that. When we've worked on projects with development authorities and they sell bonds, they have to be, even if the project goes across the counties, the monies have to be managed by the jurisdiction that either passed or sold those bonds. So there's protections both, I believe, in the general law, but it'll also be what we call a creature of contract. Yes.
Regarding the special district, I understand we have till December 1st of 2019 to either go there or not. What if there was a desire, effort to modify the special district a couple of years down the road? Is that ability in the legislation?
I don't think it calls that out specifically in the legislation, but it's like any other piece of legislation. It could be amended
Sure.
and changed.
So the way it is right
Yeah.
now is if we craft a special district, that's going to be the special district unless there were legislative changes that gave us the ability to change it or modify it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
For Cobb, first of all, I'm pretty loud. First of all, the map is 13 counties, but there are 10 districts.
Correct.
So, like we're sharing with Paulding, we're in the same district with Paulding. But the money collected in Cobb would stay in Cobb?
That is a great
Or
question.
would it be the district?
Yes, no, that's, thank you for asking that, because I should have been more clear on that. That money, for purposes of the T-SPLOS, the special district, that if you see that language in the bill, it's talking at the county. And then again, to Cobb, it's talking about this special district that would be a map, that'd be potentially something less than Cobb County. The SPLOS does not follow these 10 regional districts which cross county lines. Sales taxes are levied on the county level regardless of this. So actually, great question. I really should have pointed that out. And I know that's definitely a point of confusion, but yes,
And then I have one more question.
absolutely. After that last one, you're on a roll.
The up to 30-year and the up to 1%,
Yes.
does that apply if it's a special
Yes.
district?
Yes.
So you wouldn't have to do, Cobb wouldn't have to do the whole 1% and total 30 years up to?
That's correct. Both of them are up to. The other thing I should point out, most people, when they're looking at these provisions and looking at these transit-specific SPLOS, because we talk in terms of projects, a lot of the talk has been about what we're going to do that is new or expanded. There's nothing that I've read in this bill that would also prevent an entity, be it Cobb or any other, from the projects being listed coinciding or overlapping with existing transit projects or services. Meaning, or put more simply, you could look at using something like this provision and listing existing, say, transit services, thereby switching the funding from general fund, or which a lot of times is property taxes, to the sales tax. I mean, there's a lot of things to think about that, but I just want to point out, there's nothing in there that says it has to be expansion. These transit projects can be existing transit.
Another question, sir. Over here.
Oh.
Yeah. Can you help in stepping back and distinguishing the role of the ATL versus MARTA? When I'm looking at this, my presumption is that MARTA's functioning solely as an operational entity versus a governance entity, but
Sure.
yeah.
Sure. And so, and that's coming up on the slide, but let's jump to it. This bill and the authors behind this bill, they did not, there's nothing in this bill that prevents or requires any operator to go away. There's plenty that says operators have to coordinate with each other. And so the ATL for these projects, especially the regional ones, can suggest who should be the operator. But you still can't force somebody to operate. So MARTA doesn't go away as an operating entity, but there's nothing in here that says Cobb Link or anyone else has to go away.
All right, just kind of a clarification on that.
Yeah.
Well, the special taxing district does require MARTA to be the operator for Cobb.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I think for the special taxing district, MARTA has to do it all. I mean, if it's countywide.
So let me address that.
And the other thing I want to just point out is that December 1st date is for the referendum. The map has to be done by July 31st.
Yeah. So let me address both those. Yes, for the special district piece, what it's actually, and I could be wrong, I'll look at my team, see if I get this wrong. It has to be projects that Cobb or in the special district are looking at contracting with MARTA to do. Now, to me, whether that means there's joint services going across the district and they're working with Cobb Link, but you are right, the special district, those provisions are talking about projects that the county are doing in contract or in coordination with MARTA. The T-SPLOST, the part that doesn't go away, the part that applies now, because remember, again, Cobb has extra options. That doesn't have to be with MARTA. So this regular 1% up to 30 years doesn't have to be with MARTA. The special district piece, the piece between now and December 1 of next year, Commissioner Ott's correct. That has to be done with MARTA. And, sure. So let me repeat the question. All right. Representative Earhart was asking, is it, basically, is it correct that the county for the special district could choose to work with MARTA or not? And I need to go back and I'm trying to see if my team can do some research. For the special district, those have to be with MARTA. I know that is true for the general transit T-Splosh. I need to go back and clarify that as it relates just to the special district.
There's two sections on that.
Yes.
And you can make a case either way. You could read them as contradictory, or you can read them independently and allow the choice. And I think a lot of preference, depending, would be to allow that flexibility.
Yeah, and we'll try to get that clarification and follow up on that. So. Question over here.
Okay. You provided that MARTA can be an operator of choice, or that local government can choose another operator of choice. In the beginning of your statements, I believe one of the premises or one of the motivations for forming this was to streamline how we function. So my presumption is that we will start to see less organizations operating within the region. I think you mentioned there were over 10 of them.
Yeah.
So if we look at the ATL, I'm presuming it has a governance structure, it's a funding mechanism, but the operator is still of choice. The operator can still be chosen at a local level, and we can still have multiple entities operating within this framework.
Yes, you can still have multiple operators operating in the framework. The ATL itself can be an operator. And again, like I said, the bill does not, and it was mentioned a couple times, there is one exception, heavy rail. This bill clearly states that if there's any heavy rail within the 13 counties, MARTA will be the operator for that. And again, that's heavy rail. That is the electrified third rail subway car that you see. Light rail is different, be that streetcar or anything else. Heavy rail is the big subway electrified third rail. That has to be MARTA. After that, there can be choice. You bring up a good point, and it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve, because they purposely, the authors of the bill did not rule out other operators, but they are requiring that the ATL and as a region, we make things more seamless. So you can have multiple chefs under the hood, but for the customers, better make this look like one and operate more like one meshed together network. Okay. The question was, what does that look like? I'll happy to tell you what I think that looks like. Right now, as we sit here today, Express, we have it's called CAD-AVL, but it's what we call Where's My Bus technology. You know, you can get an app on your mobile phone, see if your bus is stuck in traffic, what's the arrival time. CobbLink has that software as well. I think they're using it on the dispatch side. I'm looking for Andrea. Is there a public-facing app on that right now? Okay, so CobbLink has the same thing. MARTA has that. Gwinnett has that. Well, guess what? 4 different entities, 4 different pieces of software. None of them are linked. There's nowhere you can go today and find one set of maps so that you could very easily coordinate a trip from one jurisdiction to another. What the bill is saying, and what, if any of you have ever heard Senator Brandon Beach talk about this, he wants you to be able to take an ATL train to an ATL bus, even an ATL Express bus, know where these services touch and coordinate. Cobb has routes. Express, which I operate, has routes. We all stop at various MARTA stations. Honestly, we haven't done a great job of coordinating the arrival time with knowing when the trains arrive to go on. This is what I'm talking about for something that's more seamless. When you have something like the I-85 bridge collapse and everyone that now has to start relying on some of these services, it's not easy to figure out if you haven't already been an early pioneer. So that's what I think this bill's about. So some of the ways we can do this is through technology. It doesn't mean granting some monopoly contract to only pick one, but it's saying little things like you have to have the same file standards and formats so that we can exchange data so people can find this information. Creating a website where all this stuff is in one place. Sharing enough information amongst customer service offices so you can answer the question of someone who's trying to get to the Braves Stadium, to downtown, or from here to Gwinnett Arena and back and forth. That's the more seamless experience that is definitely one of the intents of the bill. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Can I ask about the referendum?
Sure.
Since there's time for that. In the bill, there are several places where there's very specific language about what the referendum, there's very specific language about what the referenda should say. And
Yes.
in the Cobb County section of the bill, there's a specific question that needs to be asked, and I just wonder if that was the intention, if there's any flexibility in what that says.
Yes, another excellent question. So the bill itself is very prescriptive in the referendum, the structure, the form of the questions. During the process, we had conversations talking with legislative counsel, who does a lot of the bill drafting. In large part, they tried to mirror either the existing T-SPLOST process. And I know for a fact that at one point they were trying to just sort of do cross-references, but it got too confusing. So they cut and paste and dropped the language in place. Where they did not follow the existing T-SPLOST was when they also looked at some language in the MARTA Act, which also talked about referendums that go in front of voters. So they really weren't trying to invent new ways. They were trying to pattern after existing language that exists elsewhere in the code, but it just became easier to repeat it all rather than sending people looking to different sections. And that's especially true because you can't easily find the MARTA Act. It's not in all the statute books in the same place. And so that's why. So it is a long way of saying it is prescriptive, but it wasn't trying to do anything new or different than existing language elsewhere in the code. Okay. I'm going to hit on a couple other things and then just really just throw it open. Regional unified branding. This goes back to your question about how things are supposed to operate in the region. And I'll be honest, I think it's actually one of the challenges. The intent of the authors is clear. A lot of people had a lot of opinions on operations and who should operate. And the General Assembly, again, my personal opinion said, fine, there's a lot of transit professionals, you have a lot of reasons. The public doesn't care about the alphabet soup of agency names. Make it seamless and more unified for the customers. But one of the things that the bill is prescriptive on is regional branding. And the bill requires that the ATL develop a branding and a logo. And it even specifically says that after January 1st of 2019, assuming all this has been developed, for MARTA specifically, it says if they buy any asset that's over $250,000, and you might not know this, but almost any type of transit vehicle that moves people, $250,000 and up. So it's essentially saying you're going to buy, MARTA, you're going to buy more buses, you're going to include this branding. Why did it single out MARTA? No matter how you look at it, when you look across the region, MARTA in the 3 counties that operate still represents over 90% of all the transit movements that occur. But elsewhere in the bill, the first bullet point, the regional transit plan is supposed to include a branding plan for all transit in the region. So one of the things to get started on here over the next several months is what does that look like? And how do we come up with an inclusive process to help develop this branding? Because it's going to impact all transit, and that's regardless of whether someone does a SPLOST. And that if you wanted to know, well, how do we come up with 10 public transit agencies, just list them here, and you can see all the different logos. How do we let people know that it's part of a unified system? And if the branding changes, if it goes as far as a comprehensive rebranding, again, how do we let a commuter know this bus that you were taking today, this other one that looks different is part of the same system or still your same route? And then it ends with, after January 2023, so 5 years from now, all of MARTA's assets has to be rebranded. And there's discussion as to whether that should have also more clearly stated, be stated as saying that it applied to everybody. It doesn't say that today, but if you look at that last line in the first bullet point about the plan is supposed to be inclusive of everything in the region, there's some questions there. And this is my last slide. Well, second to last slide. So, and I think I've already said this. Right now, MARTA, Greta, CERTA, CobbLink, nothing goes away. There are some changes. MARTA, we already talked about this, is the exclusive right over heavy rail. MARTA too retains control over its local funds. So again, voters in these counties went forward, agreed to a sales tax in their counties for a specific purpose, either projects or for funding MARTA. Nothing in this bill doesn't undo any of that, all right? But it comes back to the federal funding piece. Greta as an agency continues forward. Greta has final approval over this overall transportation improvement plan on behalf of the governor. It gets involved with approvals of developments. That still goes forward. Peach Pass is still done by the Tollway Authority and some of the other programs that go in place. But the reason for creating this is, for the very first time, you have an entity at the state level that's exclusively focused on transit and transit needs in the region. The ATL does nothing else other than that. And in fact, for the transit functions that are happening today at Greta and CERTA, by 2020 and 2021 respectively, they're supposed to be phased out of those organizations and go to the ATL. So you'll have one entity at the state level focused on transit. The regional commission doesn't go away. It's just that a lot of the focus that they were doing on transit planning switches to this entity. And Gwinnett, Cherokee, and Cobb, there's additional options going forward. There's nothing in here that requires Cobb to change anything that it's doing with CobbLink. It can continue to be an operator, et cetera. It just gives new options there. And someone had mentioned it earlier. Transit's broader than most people think. Most of the operators we think of are what we call fixed route, meaning there's preset, predetermined bus routes, et cetera. But in this county, there's a lot of people who are dependent on transit services for what we call demand response, getting people to dialysis treatments. Even transit that happens at universities is transit services. Is it within scope? Yes. Is that the focal point? No. Other than understanding everything that's happening and understanding the coordination. The reason the definition is so broad is, what if students from Kennesaw State are taking classes at Georgia Tech or vice versa? Are there some transit options that maybe can be coordinated to help move them back and forth? Some of that type of planning is already happening. And again, what are some of the future possibilities? Just like I was telling you about sort of the lack of coordination on some of the routes and route planning, regional planning can bring about hopefully some other opportunities. Not everyone realizes that all the major transit operators all accept Breeze as a payment. It's just that all of them also are maintaining a separate payment system on top of whatever it costs and takes to maintain Breeze. At the state level with Express, we're phasing out our different magnetics and just using Breeze. Some people find that controversial. Personally, I think it's a good thing because I'm getting rid of redundant systems. And like I said, Breeze is accepted amongst all of these now. But what's coming in the future? Even Breeze, eventually, it'll at least be joined by what we call mobile ticketing or your phone. And again, if we can start coordinating this as a region, maybe there's better pricing, better procurement opportunities, certainly better coordination. And once we're into the phone, again, transit's broader than public transit. So coordinating with rideshare services, be it Uber, Lyft. Downtown Atlanta, we're now seeing these scooters popping up, these bird scooters. But there's people who, when we change some of the routes and we move it further away from their building, are wondering how they get to it. Or even out here or in my home county, Rockdale, I have a park and ride, but how do I get from, I call it first mile connectivity, from my doorstep to it? At the regional level, the Ubers, the Lyfts, those companies love the idea of being able to coordinate with a single entity who can help them look across the entire region, the economies of scale that come with it. So these are some of the possibilities that, again, even if services don't change today, may make either procurement of services and other things easier, and certainly better coordinated planning, either from an economic development perspective or what I call economic mobility, which is simply, can we do a better job of connecting our current citizens to some of the work opportunities that already exist? So this is what's behind the ATL, and with that, happy to just take any and all questions.
Chris, this is hopefully not too in the weeds, but I got a bad habit of reading the language, which is a curse. There's a lot of stuff in here about air quality. There's also a lot of stuff in here about jet fuel tax exemptions and other tax exemptions. Can you just briefly comment on that?
So the air quality. So yeah, a couple of things. One, even as long as I took, I did not hit every single thing that's in this bill. Remember, I said if you're having trouble sleeping, read it. The air quality. Air quality factors in two ways. This original 13 county jurisdiction that was created, even going back to when Greta was created, was due to air quality issues happening in the metro area. All right, and so this ties back to these original 13 counties that were in what we call non-attainment. And it simply has to do with the traffic congestion we're all dealing with today and the impact that it had. There are provisions that honestly were mirrored from the Greta Code that essentially say if there's additional air quality issues, in theory, the jurisdiction could grow. That is nothing new in comparison to what was in Greta, and honestly, it's probably not likely for years and years. And even so, the state, the ATL, cannot unilaterally join anybody in. It just says this could trigger making another adjoining county eligible, and they would have to vote to come in, and everyone that's in would have to vote to accept them. So that's the air quality. The jet fuel, I probably can't do a good job of articulating on the jet fuel piece. I'm not trying to hide, it's just not an area I'm up on. I would do a poor job.
Representative Carson, are you there?
Yes, and I just want everybody in the know. I want the media to know and all my colleagues to know I'm talking on a hands-free device.
I've got mine too.
There you go, Joanne. That's it. Hey, Chris, first of all, I appreciate you allowing a dial-in or what have you. I appreciate this. I'm on a business trip. My question, if you could confirm, if we go forward with a special district for Cobb, we could do a fractional tax. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And furthermore, the tax, if that is approved in a November 2019 referendum, the tax itself would start January 1st of 2020. Is that correct?
If it's done November, I believe the Cobb one says any tax that's passed shall be levied in the first full calendar month. So if it's November, I believe it would start in December, at least on paper.
can get back with you on that, sir, to confirm.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. And my other question, Chris, and it may be more of a question for Department of Revenue. I've had a few people, such as store owners and vendors and so forth, they would ask, how do we know whether or not we should assess the tax? Because it would not be dependent upon voter precincts or zip codes or what have you. It would be an all-new district, and it would be a portion of Cobb County. So this may be a question for Department of Revenue, but I'm asking, how do we let these sales tax collectors know whether or not to charge or not to charge a sales tax based on their address?
Yeah. You're right. It's probably a question for Department of Revenue, but I imagine it would have to go through the same logistics of when, like when a city within a county passes a tax. Yeah, ultimately it comes down to knowing the borders and knowing what businesses fall on which side of the map lines. But I think the Department of Revenue would work with the special district to help figure all that out.
Great. So again, that's all my questions. Chris, thank you for everything you've done. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
And while she's coming around with questions, yeah, I'll be happy to give you a copy of the PowerPoint, but also right now on the CERTA website, because the ATL, we haven't had a chance to set something up, but if you go to srta.ga.gov, actually on that page at the bottom, you'll find a link to ATL where you'll find a lot of this information there. And that's going to be even better than the PowerPoint, because as things change or we get more information or we follow up on some of these questions, we're going to try to use the web to go ahead and post it. We're also, I have plans to do a webinar going over much of the same information, but also recording that so that you have access to it and or can pass it on. But again, the website, because still looking through the bill, still finding things. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, how you doing? You've done a fantastic job with the legislation. However, our concerns are with the operational side. We're talking about branding, rebranding. The cost to rebrand all of these services would run deep into the millions. And if the objective is connectivity and straight flow, you know, in our traffic system, it appears that this fuzzy math is spending so much money in rebranding that we are not focusing on putting the money where it's going to be needed in order to achieve the connectivity that you want. It's be nice to have all the buses look alike, you know, that's something for the future. But on the operational side, there's also the labor cost, you know, that we have to take into consideration. All of this legislation is good, and we're in support of it. However, when I'm looking at Cobb, where I started my transit career, when I'm looking at Cobb with a 1-cent sales tax, county-wide would generate $140 million a year, just in Cobb alone. But the state has only appropriated 10% towards that budget. So we're kicking in $140 million, and the state is only kicking in $14 million, but they sitting in the driver's seat.
Ken, do you have a question?
Yeah, I think I made my point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, two things. So on the rebranding, right? It hasn't been decided. You can have a brand and a logo, and maybe that's something that is added onto vehicles. In other words, something low cost, less than repainting everything. And if you take as an indication in the bill, even on the part of MARTA, that's why I think one of the reasons it clearly says when you buy new stuff, you would switch to the branding, because obviously they're going to come painted, et cetera. And so it could be something that happens over time. And all I can say on your last point, I refer back to the board. You're right. There's a recognition at the state level And again, it's not every day you see the state create an entity where 2/3 are selected outside of the state process. Because there's a recognition most of this money that's being spent on transit is being generated at the local level.
We'll take one more question, Commissioner Burrow, and then I'll conclude. We'll take one more question, then
I
I'll
just
conclude.
want to ask some clarification, because I've heard that it did include this, it didn't include that, it was put back in, it was taken out. When you say transit, does that just include transit as far as what the project list could be? Or is it transportation projects as well, as long as they're identified or not?
Now, for this new up to 1%, up to 30 years, they must be transit-specific projects. Thanks.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Chris, who is the absolute perfect person to have done this. So thank you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And the reason we set up the 2-hour time frame was that there comes a point in presentations when there's individual questions, but you're all held hostage. And I don't think that's fair to everybody. So Chris will stay around here to answer any individual questions you might have. I do really want to thank every one of the senators and representatives who came today. I really appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule. I think this shows that you think this issue is a priority. And as I've said on many occasions, we'll be working hand in hand with you as we go forward in this legislation, because we're going to need your support to develop a program that's going to be supported by the taxpayers next year, and we can't do this just as the board. We have to do this as a team. So with that, thank you very much for coming this morning. Appreciate all your help, and have a great day.